Robert Park, the American sociologist, in his book The City, remarked, the city is a state of mind, a body of customs and traditions, and the organized attitudes and sentiments that inhere in these customs and are transmitted with this tradition. The city is not, in other words, merely a physical mechanism and an artificial construction. It is involved in the vital processes of the people who compose it. It's a product of nature and of particularly human nature. The key to the emergence of a successful community is the potential offered by the city for the growth and development of its residents. It has to enable its citizens to establish roots, identify with the place, and work diligently to sustain it. The city should create job opportunities, create wealth, offer services, and run the affairs of the city efficiently, and a successful community will naturally follow. It's my honor to invite Mr. Sirish Sankhe, Senior Partner, McKinsey & Company, who will moderate the first panel discussion on cities, learnings and experiences. The panelists are visionaries who have contributed to sustainable urbanization by conceptualizing, building and managing cities across diverse regions. May I invite Dr. Ajay Mathur, Director General, TERI, Mr. Ajay Pandey, Managing Director and Group CEO, Gift City, Mr. Ravindra Sannareddy, Managing Director, Sri City, Mr. Shaishav Daria, Regional CEO, Lodha Group, Mr. Ian Pang, Director General, Investment Operations of Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, and Mr. Sujay Bose, CEO, National Investment and International Finance Corporation Infrastructure Fund.
So this particular panel, is a panel of practitioners, a panel of people with cold, hard facts who tried to get new cities going in India. Probably one of the most difficult environment to get new cities going. This panel is going to focus on building new cities in India and building them to last. Right. So I'm very fortunate to have more or less 90% of India that has built new cities represented in this room today, including, of course, our Mahindra colleagues. Right. And the reason it's very important is the numbers that India is going to go from somewhere like 300 million urban population to 600 million urban population, increase of 300 million people, right? But most of it is going to be happening in existing cities, many of them in mega cities, So there's a natural question on what is the role of new cities? Why should even build? Let the existing cities expand and let's take care of urbanization that way. But the new cities play a very, very important role. It's sort of the cutting edge of planning, cutting edge of sustainability, cutting edge of all the advanced thinking that Mr. Nanda talked about, right? While making the cold, hard facts of IRR successful, because many of the new cities in India are not backed by the infinite coffers of the government, It is within the IRR constraints of a private sector people, right? So it's very interesting to say how do you get new cities going, and out of the 300 million people, almost 25 million people, at least our own projection said, should be actually housed in new cities. So that is close to 10%. We are nowhere close, by the way, and even the new cities are not taking off at the level it should, right? But it has a very important role. Last fact before we go to our panelist. Our experience and our analysis say that only 20 to 30% of the new cities around the world actually succeed. Another negative way of putting it to say 70% of the new cities actually fail. And they fail not because 20 years later there is nothing there, even though Mr. Pang will talk to you about several dozens ghost cities in China where everything is built but nobody is living there. It is not just about livability, occupancy, but something or the other goes wrong, right? Either the occupancy doesn't come in, either the jobs are not there, either the bus doesn't happen, either the community doesn't come together, and the soul of the city doesn't get created. It's a massive unsolved problem, I would say, even worldwide. So what you guys are trying to create is indeed, I think, pioneering, and therefore this particular session is going to focus on what does it take to get that virtuous cycle of new cities going. So with that, I think the panelists are already introduced, okay? But I'll just tell you why they are here, okay? And Mr. Ravindra Sanareddy is one of the pioneers of new cities, with having created the Shri City. His title is Managing Director of Shri City, and some very interesting examples of how to create a massive number of jobs, especially manufacturing, and how to create a city around it. Okay. Mr. Pang has been in many roles, right? Right now, he's the Director General of AIIB, but probably even more interesting will be your role as the ex-CEO of Surbana International and your role in Ascendas, which I don't know how many new cities you have built outside India, but it's a very interesting, it's a very interesting background for us to talk about, right? Mr. Sujay Bose, when we invited him, asked us, why is he here? Okay, and we said that you perhaps is one of the most important persons in the panel, because every time for new city creation, when we put the numbers together, and we did just for the city of Amravati, we came up with a number of 90,000 crores, which is close to 10-15 billion dollars over 20 years. And out of that, only a small amount has come in initially. So you have to get the funding cycle going. And even the initial amounts for a large new city can be as high as 10,000 crores. Where does it come from? Where does the patient capital come from? That's why you are here. Dr. Ajay Mathur, you really represent the next generation thought on sustainability, and we'd like to really learn from you on how can we really incorporate sustainability, right? And is it NPV positive if we take a private sector approach, right? Mr. Ajay Pandey, GIFT is known all over the world. It's one of the few cities which is focused on a particular sector, great infrastructure, at the same time, many challenges. We'd like to talk to you about that. And Shaishav Dharia is one of the few people who have created a 4,000-acre city, which is, I would say, in its mid-cycle, maybe 10 years ago, it got created. And when I visited it, I was quite impressed with many thoughtful elements of livability. Okay. So that's our panel. I'm very happy to have the panel which have really made sure that how things work on the ground, on what can be done and what cannot be done. Now I'll start with, there are 2-3 themes I'm going to talk about. One of them is job creation. And job creation is one of the most important livelihood is one of the most important pillars of new city. If you don't get it, and there are very many cities which are so-called ghost town or unlivable because the job creation did not work. Mr. Sanareddy, maybe I can start with you to say that how did you think about job creation? I hear that you see a hockey curve, sort of a hockey stick in job creation. You're already at, I think, 35,000 in Shri City. How do you see about this job creation, skilling, what sectors? What is your experience in job creation and livelihood creation in a new city?
Good afternoon. First, I want to thank Mr. Arun Nanda, Anita and Sangeeta for inviting me here. Just to give a background, Sri City is located 55 kilometers from Chennai, just on the border of Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu. So we used Shenzhen model, how Shenzhen got developed using Hong Kong strength. We wanted to develop Sri City using Chennai strength. Similar experiment was done before. Hosur was developed using Bangalore strength in India. So we went with that model. So we initially went, what are the good industries that are based in Chennai? That is mostly engineering, automotive engineering, light engineering, and electronics. These are the 3-4 segments we focused on. And when we started this project in 2008, I happened to be son of the soil. I grew up in that area, so we know the landscape. So we had good relations with all the, like Mr. Nanda mentioned, we included all the farmers into the land acquisition. Our land acquisition was the most successful. We acquired 8,000 acres in a consent-based acquisition without problem. We promised the jobs. So initially we thought to create these jobs, we have to find some low wage, and because it was the most backward area in Andhra Pradesh, state of Andhra Pradesh. There was not even a degree college until we went there. So obviously if we bring some high-tech jobs, it is not going to succeed. for many reasons, including lack of resources. So we went with all these, where with the semi-skilled, skilled, we brought in people like ILFS, converted this agrarian labor into industrial workers, started showing them as a resources immediately available. We brought in some of the assembly, for ladies, toy making, and some garments where you can train people within, say, 3 to 4 months kind of thing, 2 weeks to 4 months.
That skill building experience is quite interesting. You should talk more about it. How did you really build the skills of the people who almost had no skills?
Yeah, because this was more of a commitment. See, we guaranteed a job for each household, the people which had land, and also there were another category called landless labor. They were living, or the jobs that was giving through that land. We chose a dry area, about 70% is dry lands and 30% wetlands. So we had a very small population there. Total jobs we had to create in those days were about 3,000. So we started Sri City HRD Academy, brought in ILFS as a partner. Started initially when we are acquiring such a large land mass, we need a lot of security guards, we need a lot of construction workers, then we need some of the housekeeping, assuming the industry comes. These are all easy to train people. So we roped in ILFS as the partner and started training them. And then in 2008, we did our groundbreaking and then started building our infrastructure. That is when we started attracting the industry. Okay. So first few people basically came, like our IT revolution happened in India, for value buying, because they saw a big value difference between lands in Chennai versus lands in Andhra Pradesh. So it has all the connectivity, but at an affordable price kind of thing. Once we developed our infrastructure, then some of the biggies, like all these large enterprises like Cadbury's, you asked how it became hockey stick. So the 2008, 9, 10 went into our infrastructure building. That is also when world was in recession. That is one of the good things we have done. We just raised private equity, so we have to spend that money. So we went on spending on the infrastructure. That gave the confidence for all these MNCs who are coming into India.
So you sort of created a virtuous cycle of job creation. I think in India, your story is one of the impressive stories of a rapid job creation, right? Maybe I can move.
I just finished one. Since you asked about jobs, that 35,000 car. Since we got all these large ones, they started building 11, 12. So the factories got ready in 14. So they started employing. Last year, because of our whatever focus on Make in India and electronics, we got a customer called Foxconn, which one factory alone created 10,000 jobs. That is how that hockey stick experiment went. In 1 year we were able to.
We went enormously, and you have to create different skills probably for the Foxconn people.
In fact, they took care of it.
They took care of it.
They took care of it.
So, Mr. Pandey, you're on the other side of the spectrum on one level. You position the GIFT City as a hub for higher end services, middle end services. So it's a lot more services, and also a sort of an alternate financial hub. So how is your experience of job creation, especially on the higher end? What is working? What could work better?
So first and foremost, I think what is important from our perspective is that you focus on something through which the identity of the city should get created. Because I think standalone, if you try to do anything and everything for anybody and everyone, I think that's going to be a very tough task. So we focused on financial services, and we tried to put the enablers in place, including various permissions from government, central government, state government, and others to try and, So once these enablers were in place, we began to see people coming in. But I think the point to be highlighted is, this is probably the only city in the country where world-class infrastructure has been put in place, because we wanted to set an example that if you're really going to attract world-class talent, and I'm just I'll probably give an example later on. People coming in there should feel that, there is a reason for them to move in. Okay, something as basic as water from the tap is potable water. I mean, when we go out, everybody looks for to say that, that's possible overseas. Why can't it be possible in India? All people from abroad, when they come to India, the first advice they get is watch out for water. Right. Something as basic as that. So I think there are multiple elements of world-class infrastructure that was kind of created to ensure that high-end talent moves in and gets to feel the real benefit in terms of quality of life. And I think that was one way of doing it. Second thing what we did was we have partnered with almost all the 3 or 4 universities which are surrounding us. I mean, we are surrounded by IIT, Petroleum University, IIMs and others. And there are many stakeholders that have got involved, and we are now running special courses on some of the financial services capabilities, including some of the certification courses. So there is an ecosystem which is beginning to develop. That's how it's sort of shaping up.
Yeah, yeah. So, but still, to create a brand new sector like financial services in Gujarat, I guess you had to focus on infrastructure as well as to see what type of value prop you create in the city for
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So I think the answer is that you create a hardware, which is
Right.
the infrastructure side of it, and the software, which are the various enablers. And I think it's a combination of these two, which begin to click in.
Right.
And then if you envelop all of this with this element of quality of life,
Right.
and something as basic as saying, I have no hesitation in saying. So we have someone like Oracle working with us. Oracle is a name that is known to everyone. They've had 150 people, high-end work. Their global HR modules, software development happens there. In entire 1 year, only 2 people left the job, which is the lowest attrition rate Oracle has ever encountered across their global development centers. And now we are also doing study to see that this quality of water, quality of air, how much of impact it is having, even in terms of the health and insurance and all of other stuff, which is all translating in terms of quality of life of people.
So, in fact, you talked about the next topic that I was going to touch upon, which is livability, quality of living, and community. The McKinsey research on this said that 25,000 jobs is what starts creating the virtuous cycle of a city. But the same research also says that actually job creation alone is not enough. There are a whole set of examples of ghost towns where people come, work, and go back to the city, right? And even in some of the new cities in India, we see that phenomenon. So to get people to stay there, okay, and create a community and create world-class living, it's a big challenge, right? And that, by the way, is not a completely cracked problem. And I hope that in this panel, we begin to get a sense of what does that take to create that virtuous cycle of living. Maybe at this time, I go to Shaishav Dharia, because in Palawa, the interesting thing is that maybe because of Mumbai being close by, they didn't focus on job creation at all, right? They focused on livability and getting people to stay there, right? So what are some of the interesting insights from that? What came first? How did you get people? You're probably one of the highest number of people living in a new city in terms of its own percentages, right? Yeah. And I understand you're getting help from Mumbai, but when I visited you, I saw lots of interesting things. Maybe you want to talk about the livability parameters that really make a city buzz.
Sure. So just as a context, right? Yes, let's assume that we already have a GIFT city or a Sri city in the Dombivli region and the Navi Mumbai region that existed for Palawa. So Palawa is about 5,000 acres between Thane, Navi Mumbai and Kalyan Dombivli. So those who are familiar with Mumbai. So you started off with that advantage that there was jobs about 30, 40 minutes away. And we primarily played on the urbanization trend and the lack of quality affordable housing the city had at that point. So Palawa gets known reasonably well for being a smart city, but we think of the word CCTV slightly differently. And I think, Shirish, that will give you the answer of what it takes to bring people in. So CCTV for us means citizen, community, technology, and vision, right? So first it starts with citizen. To bring the first set of people inside, we know which were the kind of people we were targeting on the urbanization trend. So for them, 24/7 water, power, safe environment, and more importantly, school, education for their kids. This is what they were really lacking in the nearby areas. So you had to first start with at least this physical aspect being ready, because that is the first jump. You need the first fair of people coming in, and most of them happen to be working 30, 40 minutes away. Fortunately, the road connectivity was good. What was missing was train. So we ran our own buses that went from Palava to all the commercial districts nearby free of cost. So that way we got people to first move in. Second was the community aspect. So here the emphasis was both on the physical and the digital, because about 70% of our population works in the ITS segment in the nearby area. 20% are professionals or small business owners, and about 10% are retired seniors. So each one has a different sense. This was something we learned from Melbourne, which was like at any suburban district or any borough, you start with a center of a 1 square kilometer, which has basically education, retail, and some amount of amenities. So we have within each of our initial set of developments a clubhouse, sports facilities, places of worship, a school. This becomes the community point where people start engaging with each other. And when you build a new city, they've got to start developing those bonds. So that became a very important aspect as the core part of community. Then we supplemented it with placemaking. We tied up with a lot of people. So every week there were classes, whether it was singing, dance, music, there were festivals. And you had to do this literally round the year so that they never felt the reason to leave Palava unless they had to visit family. On the digital side, today our Facebook page has about 60,000 active users. The number is far larger. These are basically citizens. It becomes a great way for them to communicate amongst each other, for us to share what's happening in the city. And now they actually call themselves Palavites. They don't say, we are citizens of Mumbai, but we're actually Palavites. That's the first change of a community. Third is technology. It's important to understand that you are taking, city tax for maintenance, building tax for maintaining a building, from people who have never actually paid this ever before. So they become damn demanding. I can't even explain to you that if they give you what we would think is a small amount, the expectation is significant. That's where technology comes in a large way, because you want to try to deliver their needs and quality of service in a cost-efficient manner. So for example, we don't have any security guards in any building in the city. And they find it very difficult to understand how that can happen. That's where CCTV cameras, we have dog squads, we have patrol guards. All of that goes into basically creating the safe, secure environment connected to a command center. It took about a year and a half of education, everything to explain why it works and how it lowers the cost of delivery. The last part is vision. We have obviously a lot of vision when you start off what you want to achieve. One of it was participative governance, right? The important part of this is that you don't let go if you want people to continue moving in. And participative citizenship is not easy. First of all, we are no experts in it. We are doing trial and error to some extent. But we've now, every weekend, by function, we have participative councils between residents and the city to understand what we're not doing well, what we should do differently. They start feeling a voice in it, because then you're also able to explain why sometimes you're taking hard actions to sustain the city. So this is the CCTV principle that's allowed us to now have about 50,000 people living in the city today.
Yeah, the whole aspect of placemaking, community vision, I think it's where you really have to understand your stakeholders and put something together that works. And once it works, it becomes a virtuous cycle. For a city which doesn't have Mumbai though close by, how to create that is a challenge by itself. I would like to ask Mr. Pang about your experience outside India on successful cities and creating this community livability. What worked? What are some of the most interesting examples? What are the principles? Job creation, everybody understands to some extent, but this livability, community, and so on are topics that needed to be really focused on. How is your experience on that?
Perhaps before I answer the question direct, I think let's talk about an important C in urbanization, which is competition. Building cities is about competing with the next city. It's about competing with the existing city. It's about competing with the future cities. All right? It's about competing to stay relevant to the economy. So the fact that you're going to invest, you build it doesn't mean that people will come, investment will come. So it is a competition to stay relevant. So for that competition to stay relevant, there are inherent strengths of each location. All right, and therefore that explains why you mentioned about the ghost towns in China, because they are not relevant at all. And there's a pure wastage of capital after going in, investing. And there are successful cities like Suzhou Industrial Parks. These are parks that makes the whole region of Jiangsu very successful. And in Guangzhou, there are huge industrial development because it utilizes the cheap labor in the 1990s of China. So there are reasons why cities are built. All right. So in that sense, cities would have to compete. And that's not about emerging. It's also about continuing to stay relevant. Put it this way, Singapore, if you look at Singapore, I come from Singapore. Singapore, in the 1800s, all right, was made relevant by competing against Malacca. And therefore, it stayed relevant and continued to grow. And look at Malacca. It basically fall out of place. All right? It doesn't mean that you are relevant now. You will be relevant tomorrow. All right? So what makes a place competitive are the thoughts that we need to come through. And one of the other C that come in is connectivity. There is a direct correlation between GDP per capita versus the number of connections of that particular location. It can be a city, it can be a town, it can be a village. All right. In Japan, in US, cities and towns are made irrelevant when highways bypass them. This is a natural thing. It will happen. If you lose your connection, you lose everything. And therefore, if you are building a city, every day you must be thinking of how to enhance your connectivity. US, with a quarter of Chinese population, has 400 airports, and the Chinese only have 130. All right? Well, of course, you can say it's a chicken and egg issue, all right? But the city or the country that is more conscious about its connectivity will stay ahead, will always stay ahead. And then the third C, the capital. That's where Sujay and myself are involved in the investment front. The money has to come in, all right? And how to utilize the private sector money is now the formula. The governments of today are constrained by their fiscal position, are constrained by their foreign reserves, and so on and so forth. All right? It's now about utilizing private capital. And we can see the examples here today that cities in China, in India, are utilizing private capital to build it up. All right? So I think if all these three C's can be aligned in those ways, and then there will be sustainability and there will be success. That's my perspective. Thanks.
The importance of competition, I think, naturally comes into play because many new cities actually not only have to compete on cities on the other coast, but they most of the time have to compete with the city immediately next door, right? If you are next to Chennai, then you are actually competing with Chennai as well, right? If you are next to Jaipur, you are competing with Jaipur. On one side, you can say Indian cities is no competition, but they have the virtuous cycle going for them, right? Even in the bad infrastructure that is there. So the whole competition, I think, is an important and interesting insight, and the connectivity is another interesting insight. Thank you, Mr. Pang. So we moved from job creation to some extent livability, and at the end, any of you have any other questions or any of the panelists have more points on this, we'll come to that. But we'll move to an important element of livability, sustainability, right? Many years ago, when we were designing the city and planning, many of the sustainability elements were good to show, but not really to put, because they were NPV negative, they were quite difficult. But it has, I think, changed substantially, both because of technology, people's expectations, what's happening around us in terms of pollution, water scarcity, and so on. So, Dr. Mathur, really, it's a question for you, is how should new cities embrace sustainability? What of the sustainability elements really work? And how will that change, you think, going forward? This encompasses a lot of things, I know. Water, electricity, solar, but any of these sustainability elements, it will be good to talk to you. You have seen this for many years.
Thanks. You know, many of these things are, for example, take solar.
Yeah.
In solar, if you go in for rooftop solar, it becomes a private investment. If you're talking of solar being put out as a utility based, then you and I are paying for it.
Right.
The challenge, of course, in solar is how much can you do on the rooftop? If you have dense cities means that the amount of rooftop per person is not very much. The short point to that is we need to find out what is an optimal density that we plan for. There is this oft quoted example of Atlanta versus Barcelona. Two cities, approximately equal incomes, equal populations, but Atlanta is 8 times as spread as Barcelona is. In spite of the fact that Atlanta has a lot of high-rise buildings, Barcelona has relatively few. But Barcelona seems to have found that the 4 or 5 storied building is a good compromise. You can get a lot of people, and the setbacks that are there with high-rise buildings are not there. What it also does is it provides a lot of roof space.
Right.
Which allows a lot more solar to be put than if you have only high-rise buildings. Now, obviously, if you have an island city like Bombay, the amount of 5-storied buildings will never be adequate. So, yes, of course, there is a locality-specific issue to this.
Right.
The second issue relates, I think the best example is given by water.
Right.
Or even more than water, by sewage treatment.
Sewage.
There is almost no existing city in India where all sewage is collected and transferred to a sewage treatment plant. This is a challenge. Yet, if we look at newer developments in which many of you have been associated, take the example of Bangalore, where every new multi-storied building has to have its own sewage effluent treatment plant. That has happened largely because technology and economics have come to a point where it makes economic sense to the people who live in the building. And the technology is such that you can actually locate it where you have a high-rise building. So the challenge, therefore, is one is of space, whether it's electricity or sewage, similarly with water, one is of space. And the other is, how do you get these technologies down to a price that you and I are willing to afford? And here I think issues related to upscaling and upscaling in a manner that competition occurs and prices come down is something that we need to investigate far more than we have done so far. Short point, sustainability is doable, but it's a step at a time.
Thank you. I think, as I said, that it's a very interesting point. Solar, water, sewage, and energy, water, sewage, walk to work, green, all this which used to be luxuries 10 years ago, are, I think, not only necessities will get incorporated, but you brought out a very important point, which is the role of planning. Overall integrated planning. It should not be an afterthought, right? That we will do X and Y.
One of the things that I'd like to add is, and this goes to the earlier discussion about new cities.
Right.
I moved to this city about 35 years ago.
Right.
Since then, there have been 8 or 9 new cities
built
around here.
Yes.
Whether it is Gurgaon or Noida or Dwarka or Rohini or whatever, each of these is a new town.
City.
And the interesting thing about, at least about Delhi, but similarly it's happening in Mumbai, is that because we are developing into towns with multiple business centers, many of these have become cities in which the long-term commutes are relatively limited. I was completely taken aback that the average commute in Delhi is actually 7 kilometers. It kind of surprised me. I expected it to be 17. But what it tells us is that the concept of a city with multiple centers is far more effective than having one central business district.
Yeah. This whole point that we are building new cities all through, and especially around our metropolitan centers, is absolutely true. Unfortunately, the thinking that goes in terms of planning, governance, sustainability, and that's why what the practitioners are doing in terms of new cities, in fact, has to be applied to many of these cities. Any other point from the panel on sustainability? Are you using sustainability actively in your cities? Is it NPV positive? Which one works? Which one? Just a minute on this from any of the panelists.
I think it works quite well now. One is, if you are thinking of building a city, obviously you're talking of decades. Automatically the answer becomes you have to become sustainable, especially on precious your resources. You talked about water and recycling. Water costs in Mumbai or India for that matter are still quite subsidized compared to what it should be. Where we are in Palava, actually we pay 3 times the cost of water that the island city of Mumbai pays, right? So that's how much is subsidized in the island city. It's only going to go up. So the interesting thing was we have a BOO model, the first of its kind with GE, wherein we don't pay for the capex. For every liter of water they treat and give back to us for landscape or flushing use, that's what we pay for, right? And the water cost that is given back to us is actually almost equal to the cost of potable water. Now, even today, it's absolutely viable, and in the future, it's going to become even more viable. So now, sustainability and economics both are aligned together and can work great.
So I'll just add one example. We are a zero discharge city, so anything and everything that comes out gets recycled, reused. But one of the best uses that we are doing for the wastewater is we take that water, it is recycled, we cool it, and we have district cooling mechanism in the entire city, which is 30% cost efficient, both in terms of noise and maintenance and otherwise, right? So you're also doing the recycling for the water. You chill it, you sort of then pump it, heat exchangers. There are no noises, there are no individual air conditioners in the building, right? So at some stage, this equation is beginning to sort of, work well.
Yeah, I think we are one of the few cities. I don't know whether there's anybody else.
So district cooling is there in T3 in Delhi.
Yeah.
However, at a city level, we are the first in the country. Yeah.
So an interesting example, right? So we discuss job creation, we discuss livability, we discuss sustainability. I have 2 more topics. I'll come to funding and financing. But before that, a point you made on connectivity. Okay, and connectivity, not digital connectivity, I'm talking about now physical connectivity, and I have a question for the panel again. Most of these planning, because perhaps they're done by the private sector, are basically based on roads as a principle, as a principal way of connectivity, right? And only when you have so much congestion that you can't go anymore, then we start thinking about public transport. So this whole issue of transportation for new cities, okay, or even transportation for this existing new cities around existing cities is something that is really bothering us, because in Amravati, for example, Mr. Ram Manohar is not here. We are trying to figure out what type of transportation solution we use, because the general answer on the planning front was build a bunch of roads. They look beautiful. By the way, they all work for the first 10 years, and in the 12th year, suddenly you have so much congestion, then you start thinking about metro or, bus rapid transit. It's too late, right? Just a question for the panel, since you are involved in new cities, and I know this you cannot perhaps do it on your own. What is this transportation solution, public transportation solution for new cities that either you have looked at or you will recommend? And I know you have looked at it to some extent, maybe with government help. But what is that? Because that, I think, is the holy grail I consider of Indian cities, because if you don't connect them physically, it just simply does not work, and then all other issues occur that are there with transportation. Any thoughts from the panel on public transportation for new cities?
Yeah, this is a very important part of sustainability. is the intra-city transportation. I think a lot of us have taken traffic jams as a norm, and we have accepted the fact. But there lies too much inefficiency, and it degrades quality of life as though we are boiling a frog without noticing that we are actually dying. We are losing time, all right, on the streets. I think what is happening that we see in AIIB is that Indian cities are getting to understand this. We are seeing no less than 7 cities requesting for metros. All right, this is a phenomena. Probably you don't see so many sets of metros coming out, and these are metros that has already been planned and in the midst of looking for capital and looking for funding. I would ask that why is it so late?
Yeah.
Right? The planners and the municipals should be asking themselves why such facilities is an afterthought. It should have been part of the master plan. It should have been thought through as the city progress.
Yeah.
All right. So it is fundamental to the professional culture, the way we do our work as urbanization professionals. And I, being an urbanization professional, I always take responsibility for the cities I am involved. For example, in Singapore, and Singapore itself also have its chapter. If you know, the Singapore government was beaten quite badly in 2011 elections because there's a massive breakdown in the public transport system, not able to cater to its growing population. So as urban professionals, I urge my fellow professionals to look at this and take it upon as our professional responsibility rather than passing it to the governments per se. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Mr. Nanda, you wanted to ask a question? Yeah, please do.
I have 2 very modest ladies sitting here.
Right. Can we give him a...
What our team did was, which I think is one of the smartest.
Right.
We built a railway station and handed over to the government. Cheapest possible solution.
Excellent.
We were close to a railway track. We built a railway station and handed over to the government. The clients were happy. They were not required. Infosys and Wipro and others didn't have to transport people from the city in buses.
Right.
The employees were happy. I mean,
Right.
the biggest joy I got was when I stood at the station and saw these 20-something old coming
from
smiling,
the train.
fresh, and not cooked up in a bus in 2 hours. You know, so I think you have to think. And the credit goes to these 2 humble, modest ladies.
Ladies around you. Thank you. You wanted to make a point in a minute? Yeah.
What I wanted to say was that we have kind of got our overall transportation plan integrated with the government itself. There are 2-3 things that we have done for GIFT. First and foremost, till the time the metro comes in, and we have planned metro stations in such a fashion that out of all the 83 towers that are coming up, even if you have to walk, you will not have to walk more than 500 meters to go to this metro station. So that's, so it is, what it's actually planned that way. Second thing is, till that whole thing takes, shape, the problem in India majority of the times is that the arteries are there, the issues with the first mile and the last mile. And I think as cities which are coming up, and in fact he gave an example of reaching out to bus, wherever it's possible, we have begun to do the first mile as well as the last mile with the city BRTS system, with the other transportation system. So there has to be a complementary kind of a story rather than just stand alone and looking at only one mode of transport.
Thank you. Very, very important element, many innovative solutions, but the importance of planning is quite there. I'm sure that I'm being told how much, I don't have much time. Yeah. Yeah. We'll do that, Sangeeta. There's a, yeah.
Look, I just had a quick
Yeah,
point to add, which is, in our IFC infrastructure business, we actually had a relatively small cities financing operation.
Right.
I would say probably 3/4 of the projects that we financed were all related to clean transportation.
I see.
Either bus transit systems or some kind of a rail system, conversions to gas, and so on. The issue, of course, is which comes through, and you need smart solutions like what Mr. Nanda referred to, is the balance between the long-term capital need and the short-term capital availability is always a challenge. And also, cities develop or finance themselves in many cases through land sales. So hence, that leads to much more of a congestion format rather than a sprawl format. And hence, totally agree with with what everybody said, that the conviction in terms of long-term planning and then sticking to that sustainability path when we are focusing on new cities becomes almost the key factor, for those cities in the future.
Thanks. So anyway, you wanted to say.
I mean, drawing on what everybody said, and drawing on global experience, we see three kinds of transportation needs evolve. As Delhi is 10 cities close to each other, the first thing that you need is transport from one city, say Delhi to Gurgaon.
Right.
That's where metro makes great sense. Metro by itself makes huge amount of losses. It has to be subsidized. A private sector cannot subsidize it. It has to be government-based. And that's where Mr. Nanda's solution of creating the stations, or what Mr. Pandey said, creating the stations and integrating them into a system makes sense. The second is the 5, 6, 7 kilometers I have to travel to work.
Right.
This is very clearly amenable to things like rapid transport if you can do it early enough.
Right.
The point that you said about longer term needs and shorter term capital availability, the good thing about a bus rapid transit system is that it can grow. If you leave the space available, it can grow depending on wherever the need is. And the third is the last mile connectivity. You need to walk to your market. So the ability to have walkways or bicycle paths in the shortest distance. I think if you're able to get these three things right, you have a sustainable transport system which can grow as the city grows.
And the point is most of the time it's neglected, and suddenly trying to plan at the last minute does not work. We have one more topic, which is funding and financing, and Sujay, you started talking about that. The key thing is that cities require patient capital. Not much of it exists in India. You're the CEO of a newly created National Investment Fund. Is this going to create any patient capital? And do you see patient capital getting created in the country for city building?
It's critical, and we are just a piece of it, but we need a lot of support, clearly. But let me just take a minute to just introduce the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund, because it's probably a new entity for many of you. So the NIIF is a new institution that has been anchored by the government. So the government is putting in basically the anchor capital. And then we are in the process of raising an additional amount of capital from institutional investors to create a large pool available for infrastructure equity investing in India. And we are progressing. So I've been in the job for about 4 months now. We've made good progress in trying to define the structure of what we want to do, and we are in the process right now of raising the capital from international institutional investors. So hopefully we'll be speaking to many of you about specific investments soon. Now, having said that, in response to your question, I would revert to this. Several people referred to it, the concept of competition, which of course in the capital space is also equally relevant. Just to give you a sense, so in India, different estimates show that we need about $500 billion to about $1 trillion equivalent of investment for the infrastructure sector in the next 5 years. OECD calculations for global infrastructure requirements is something in the range of $80 trillion. There is not that much capital. So the capital that's available has plenty of opportunity to basically seek out. And hence, it comes back to the concept of differentiation and understanding what each investor wants. and being able to provide different kinds of investors with different risk appetites the right product with the right level of risk-return trade-off, with the right tenor, and so on and so forth. So in that space, clearly agree with you that, let me just add that clearly, I mean, as everybody is referring to, in building a new city, which is going through a phase of evolution, there are different kinds of capital that the city will tap into. I mean, there's the public capital, then there's multilateral capital, then there's strategic capital like what we are trying to put together. Finally, there's there's private capital, and finally there's capital markets. And literally the whole idea is the more the city gets independent in being able to access public markets, the rest of us are really trying to get the city to that point where it's sustaining. Now, clearly, we've identified, and it can be observed in what's happened in the Indian infrastructure investing space, that long-term patient capital is critical for us to develop infrastructure in a sustainable manner. Infrastructure is a cyclical business. There are issues that will come up with different, from different perspectives over time. So what we are trying to do actually is raise equity capital in our, in one of the NIF funds, which has at least a 15-year type of a horizon. Hopefully, we can get it closer to 20. And the idea is that when we invest not with the idea that we are going to have to exit 4 or 5 years down the road, but literally we are creating a more continuous cash flow, which will provide an yield to investors over time.
Right.
But that also means that we have to find ways for other kinds of capital to come and take the early, because a lot of the foreign institutional investors, the international investors, are actually looking for post-construction assets. So we have to come up smartly and design how we actually create those post-construction assets so that over time we create a virtuous circle where we are able to continuously build, put the assets in the hands of people who like that long, patient, yield-based return, and then build with that capital that we get out of, handing over those assets, build again. And that has to again play into the long-term development plan of the cities.
Yeah. No, so on behalf of the new city developers, I can tell you that at least our calculations say that new city development is one of the safest investment. What I mean by that is backed by land, which is ever increasing in value. The issue comes in cash flows, though. Okay, the cash flows are not necessarily predictable, but the investment is safe. So therefore, a 15-20% horizon.
And I have another point on that, which is, again, I think we were talking about the balance between short-term and long-term.
Right.
Again, I think it becomes an issue for the city from a capital allocation standpoint of figuring out, do I sell the land now, or do I put in a little bit of money, raise the value of the land, then sell it, again put in a little. So this is really
all,
the trick.
all there, and there's a lot of virtuous cycle. I had many questions on that, but we are running out of time. I have one final question, but I won't ask that now, about the role of the government, because there's a lot of private sector energy here, whether the government is playing the role that is required. It was a question, but I will at this time maybe open it up to the audience for some interesting question. If we still have a minute at the end, maybe I will ask my final question. So I'd like to open it to the audience. Yeah, okay. Sorry. Yeah. Please mention your name and a short question. Sorry, if you can just,
My name is Hari Hegde and I work for Wipro. In case you have space for some contrarian views, I have two comments to make. One, let me start with the gentleman who said metro needs to be prioritized, if he meant that. Here are some data points. I would sort of agree completely with what Mr. Nanda said. That was the smartest thing to do and we are the beneficiaries. It's actually riding on the urban rail system and augmenting it through a train station, very efficient. There is a serious discussion on this happening in Bangalore. We are looking at some existing urban rail systems to be augmented.
Right.
But he also talked of Curitiba. Curitiba is a great experiment in bus rapid transportation system. And data points say that bus rapid transportation system, purely from the economic efficiency, they are 16x the metro. So the question for us to ask is, should we in the Indian context prioritize BRTS? I'm not talking it's an either or.
Right.
What do you prioritize? That's one contrarian view. The second bit, Ajay, I'm a great believer in renewable energy, you know that. But putting solar on rooftop, beyond a point in a city, the effect of that has not yet been assessed, because what happens typically in a solar is about 20 to 30% gets converted into energy, rest gets converted into heat. A large spread of solar on rooftop could also create significant amount of heat islands in the cities. That is something that we need to
Okay,
be cognizant
so you put two contrarian views, BRTS versus metro and solar on rooftops. Any quick comments on that? I'm converting your views into a question. Yeah, anything?
As with Hari, I always agree with him. Metro loses money on each passenger it moves. And therefore, unless it is connected to the larger system, where, in my view, it only makes sense if you're doing long distance transport. So Delhi to Gurgaon is the ideal, or Noida to Delhi is the ideal for a metro system. On the issue of heat, this is something that I continue to study, but the short point is that suppose the solar panel wasn't there, the amount of sunlight that would be hitting would be the same, and it would all be absorbed by the roof of the building. What the difference is in the two is something that I think, I'm not going to get technical, it's a matter of wavelengths and so on, but the difference between the two is what we need to study.
Okay. You want to?
Yeah, since metro we are talking about, Alstom is located in Sri City.
Yeah.
We make coaches for Chennai Metro, Cochin, Sydney and all. But we are not anywhere close to using metro in Sri City for next 10 to 15 years.
Right.
Because we don't need it, walk to work concept, these things. So
Yeah.
new cities cannot afford economically these
Metros.
metros.
What about BRTS?
BRT is also, see, there is a, I mean, again, it is all economics, because on one hand, we are telling walk to work.
Walk to work,
concept,
okay. So if you're saying walk to
sustainability,
work
all
is
these
there,
things,
then
you
yeah.
put these facilities,
Yeah.
you are defeating, you are contradicting yourself. Hence, we said in the beginning, we are going to have a lot of residential communities, people can walk to work. If there is a need, and also in the beginning, when you are in a backward area,
sure.
you need to have a lot of, you have to give the flexibility for the industry to bring their employees at their will.
Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
Actually, may I
Yeah.
take on the Hari's point? Totally agree with you that actually metro don't make money. There are not many metros that make money, I would say. I can only think of three. The way metro system work is a function of density, and it's a function of how big is the city. All right, so of course you cannot plan that very clearly, but we hope that the governments would have a view when their cities are already growing, they should have made provision, because exactly what you say, the capital cost is very high. So if we don't have to do the underground portion, actually most metros would have broke even. Why are there so many cities having to go underground? Actually, that is irrational. Going underground is irrational. It multiplies the cost by 4 times. All right. So we do need to plan ahead to have provisions for it to be above ground. And the next point is that it has to integrate. And integration with bus systems, with other forms of surface transport systems is necessary. All right. And there lies another thought that city cores, should it be actually motorized? If it doesn't, if we at one day, if New York City or even Singapore, portions of it can be demotorized, what will be the quality of life? And then we talk about the time spent on the systems, how much people travel on the roads.
Yeah.
Would be justification where the government has to step in to subsidize and make the systems available, because it's for the greater good. Yeah.
Thank you. We have time for maybe 2 more questions. Yeah, please go ahead. Sorry, we need to. Yeah, there was a mic somewhere here. Yeah.
Hi, Shirish.
Yeah.
My name is Shailesh Pathak. I work in
Yeah.
infrastructure in cities.
Yes.
To answer your question on what is the best mode of public transit for a new city, it's obviously walking and cycling.
Right.
And as Mr. Sena Reddy said, uh, you can't afford high cost. And Sri City is a great example, where you bring in the jobs first, and then you start developing the affordable housing. We've spoken about that.
Right.
And the other point was, AIIB is getting metro projects from existing cities. It's not getting it from new cities, right? But on Sujay's point, I strongly believe that there's no international dollar that's going to come into India for primary financing of infrastructure. It is patient capital, and therefore it is happier with lower returns. And lower returns come when the risk is lower. So this
So after
financing
getting
of,
built, yeah.
the financing of new cities is akin to financing of new infrastructure. Why would I, sitting in Canada, finance construction of new cities or construction of new infrastructure? And probably this is what Amitabh Kant realized when he was developing DMIC's concepts.
Yeah.
And any new city is going to take at least 20 to 30 years to really come to scale.
Yeah.
Just want to add on the financing of new
Yeah.
cities, since that is one of the points you said you will talk.
Yeah.
There is no money for new cities. I think we have to be clear that you said patient capital. It is a feel-good capital in my view, because
Okay.
when there was a euphoria in India, I'm talking of Lehman
2008.
Brothers, 2008. Our investors didn't know what is involved. We didn't know what is involved.
Okay,
We invested
so
our
we
capital.
invested.
They invested. Today, when we didn't have land, we didn't have customers, we were able to raise private equity. Today, we have everything. I don't think we get even 100 rupees into the capital, because it may be guaranteed, but returns are very, very long term, and it is not.
So
at
you
least
don't believe
I tell
external
people,
funding
I tell
of-
people, I don't. Not in our lifetime we'll see the money.
I don't know if this was a 5-minute mark or the final mark. I'm taking it 5 minutes to go mark. Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah.
I'll just add to that, and I basically fundamentally agree with both the points. But there's one opportunity
Yeah.
I think that we have today, which is when investors look at the global scenario from a macro standpoint, India is shining bright. And it is clear that if we continue on a path of 7-8% growth, hopefully it continues to increase, we are going to become a major player. We are already a major player in many sectors, but we're going to become a major player in every sector almost. And investors will want to have allocation, and this is what, we have some colleagues here from the Canadian pension funds, for example. They always look at the allocation of the assets,
Yeah.
and the allocation of the assets to India will have to increase. Now, having said that, I mean, this is the whole concept of finding, the right, the right fit for the right
Yeah,
person.
right.
And if we do things right, and instead of maybe having a very long phase one development of a city, phase it in put it in shorter phases, and use the early phases to literally bring more predictability to the city.
Right.
In terms of infrastructure, in terms of regulation. I think several of you have been doing that. Then I think we can speed up that patient capital coming in. But I think we have to be realistic about the scale and the availability of that kind of finance for a greenfield project.
Yeah.
Those investors want to invest in scale, clearly. But they also want to invest with predictability. And I agree with you that they're looking for, not for the high returns, they're looking for fair returns
right.
with managed risk. This is the key.
This is the key. Okay, I already got my sign from the back that there are only a couple of minutes to go. So
Can I add to that point?
Okay,
I feel
but
obliged
1
to
minute,
add.
1 minute.
Look, I think I totally agree with you, but I would like to inject some optimism in this, all right? If you look at the success, just now I mentioned about Suzhou Industrial Park, Bintan and Batam in Indonesia, these are wonderful examples of cities making money after the 10th year, all right? So this has the other aspect of the optimism. Yes, it is a patient capital, but you look at it, it gives you time to structure your capital structure. You can raise bonds, you can let go some of your equity and allow other people to participate. You can form funds and so on and so forth. And you can even have vehicles in the stock market like investment trusts that you exit to. So if you are utilizing all those vehicles, actually one development, you can earn a few rounds of money. All right, so it's about structuring.
So, Mr. Pang, as soon as you said that, a few eyebrows went up with, I think, hope and optimism. There are some people in the 10th year of their seventh year, exactly. So there are cities which are turned positive in the 7th year. There are cities which are turning positive in the 10th year. So you're absolutely right. But even a 10-year, I call it a patient capital. Guys, gentlemen, ladies, we sort of covered many topics today. Okay, the main theme was how do you build cities for the future, and there were a number of points related to sustainability, livability, job creation, transportation, financing. It's really the careful application of all these elements together. I consider city building to be one of the most difficult enterprise because it's chaotic. It's a little bit unpredictable because it is based on the surroundings. Same way I call the job of a mayor to be the toughest job of CEO job in the world. Similarly, I consider city building to be one of the toughest activities. Having said that, the force of urbanization, especially in India, I hope that we can all get together 10 years down the road and have some 25 fantastic cities to look at and many more examples like what Mr. Nanda mentioned on many best practices and many practices that will all come together. And as McKinsey and Company and as well as Confluence, we are committed to just following up on this whole journey of new cities in India, the best practices, how this will all come together. So therefore, I would like to thank the panelists really for sharing your experiences and all of you for patiently listening to us and also putting some controversial as well as a different point of view. So thank you again. Let's give a big hand to the panelists.
I would request the panelists to remain seated for a few more minutes. There are a couple of questions that have come from our social media followers. The first one is for... yeah, just a couple of questions. So. The first one is from Mr. Ajay Mathur. What are the latest trends in energy efficiency that you foresee gaining traction?
The one that is most important is air conditioning. This is the largest driver for demand in energy, and therefore storage of air conditioning is important. More efficient air conditioners are important, and demand response measures so that you can jack up the set point of air conditioners when the electricity becomes very expensive. Those are the kinds of things which are absolutely at the top of the agenda as far as energy is concerned.
Thank you. And the second one is from Mr. Ajay Pandey. How can infrastructure planning improve the urban experience for citizens? How can infrastructure planning improve the urban experience for citizens?
Well, I guess I think this comment was made earlier. You have to integrate the views and points from the citizens, and depending on and that's why I made a point about saying that you have to figure out what is going to be the identity of your city, and hence you begin to structure your story, whether it's infrastructure, whether it is the life creation, whether it is events, whichever way you want to call it, skill development, in and around a particular thought and ecosystem, which is done better in terms of participation of the existing residents and of course the future residents. So there has to be a little bit of a handshaking that has to go on.
Thank you. And more people will be moving to the cities in the next 40 years than in the entire span of human history. Building brand new cities as a response to this unprecedented urban boom is perhaps the boldest reaction so far. These urban utopias not only represent hundreds of billions of dollars of investments, millions of potential employment opportunities, but also break ground for innovation and technology to bring intrinsic to urban lifestyles. Every choice new city builders make can either become a cutting-edge innovation or a source of future conflict. Despite common challenges, each city is unique, like we heard from all of you, and needs to adjust priorities and set targets according to its own local context. If city science teaches us anything, it's that no two cities are the same. So, new city builders have a blank sheet and centuries worth of natural urban experiments to help shape tomorrow. Some new cities will succeed while others may stumble. I think you were talking about a success rate of 30%. We hope that the ideas presented here will provide insights and help new city builders define their priorities to achieve their bold vision. I now call upon Ms. Sangeeta Prasad, Chief Executive Officer, Integrated Cities and Industrial Clusters Business, Mahindra Lifespace Developers Limited, to present mementos to our, as a token of appreciation to our distinguished panelists.